The family was praying before the meal, but the next moment the ground began to shake. Sensing something bad, the father hurriedly leaned out of the window to check, but it was a large group of vampires that were rushing towards the place. He immediately closed all the doors and windows, grabbed his weapon and prepared to fight back. The mother pushed away the dining room table and opened the cellar door below for her daughter to hide in.
Whatever you hear, don't scream.
It didn't take long for the sounds of a fierce fight to come from above. As the mother let out her last scream, the fighting came to a screeching halt. The girl could only cover her mouth helplessly, and even her breathing became cautious, but even so, she was discovered by the vampire. This is a world where vampires and humans have fought each other. Since the advent of humans, vampires have been a horrible creature. With their speed and strength, they once put humans in a difficult battle. But vampires also have a fatal weakness, and that is their fear of sunlight. Because of this, humans have the capital to fight vampires. However, it was almost impossible to destroy them completely, because at night the vampires would fight back harder and harder. The battle went on for thousands of years. The only remaining human beings lived in a walled city under the shelter of the church. In order to fight the vampires, the church also trained a team of highly capable demon hunters, who had great physical strength and fighting experience. After the clerics joined the battlefield, the war between humans and vampires was finally won and the remaining vampires were imprisoned in a prison, but the church did not remember the dedication of the cleric hunters. The church hierarchy even disbanded all the demon hunting groups. The demon hunting clergy gradually faded out of sight. However, people could not have imagined that vampires would come again on this day. Paul was just about to go home when he was suddenly approached by a man who was a sheriff. The sheriff told Paul that his brother's family had been attacked by vampires, and his brother and sister-in-law had died in the hands of vampires. Paul did not hesitate. He immediately approached the church hierarchy and told them about the vampires, and hoped that they would restore their authority and go out to hunt them down. However, the church hierarchy did not believe that the vampires would reappear, as they had not received any news of the vampires escaping from the prison, and decisively rejected his request. They also warned Paul that he would be excommunicated if he went out on his own. Although Paul outwardly compromised, he knew that the church would not allow him to resume his authority because they were afraid that the demon-hunting clergy would influence their position. The church also knew that Paul would not give up, so they sent their armed forces to the bar to try to forcefully control him. At this moment, Paul finally understood that the church had no reason to let him continue his loyalty. After finishing off a few enemies, Paul immediately returned home, put on his vampire hunting weapons, put on his black cloak, mounted his former chariot, and left the holy city with determination. After several hours of travel, he finally arrived at his brother's home. At the same time, Sheriff Kem also arrived. After burying his brother and sister-in-law's bodies, the two men inquired about the vampires' tracks near the house and immediately followed after them. They did not know that the church hierarchy, after learning that Paul had left without permission, called the remaining demon hunters and ordered them to launch a hunt for Paul. Paul's side followed the clues to the prison. The guards had disappeared and the prisoners had been infected by the vampires, turning them into half-human. But when the two men arrived at the interior of the prison, but did not find the vampire figure, just as they were about to interrogate one of the mutants in the cell, several mutants with weapons suddenly appeared outside and attacked Kem at the door. Kem backhanded one of the mutants and fled to the outside of the prison, but he was almost cut off just before he peeked out. As the three mutants close in, Kem can only pull out his pistol and fight to the death. At that moment, Paul suddenly appeared. As a demon hunter, A-Way is really good. Just a moment to kill two mutants. However, in the face of Paul's questioning, the only remaining mutants still refused to reveal Lily's whereabouts. Paul could only be a little rougher, but the mutant slowly pointed his finger at the disappearing sunlight. Paul knew what this meant. As the last ray of sunlight disappeared, the next second the vampires pushed open the coffin panels and poured out of the underground prison. Faced with this group of bloodthirsty vampires, the battle-hardened Paul did not panic. He slowly took out his exorcism Bible, recited the incantation without panic, and then threw out some crosses from the book. The crosses were instantly transformed into weapons of death, and the moment the vampires attacked, Paul took the weapons and started the slaughter. But after the two vampires were finished, Kem was pounced on by another vampire, but Paul came to the rescue in time. The last vampire saw that he was no match for Paul, so he decided to run away. Without the support of the vampire, the mutant had to tell the whereabouts of Lily. Paul then took out the map and found that the direction they went was the largest lair of the vampires. A few years ago, the demon hunting group had entered this place in order to besiege the vampires, and lost a teammate as a result. And now he had to go again to save Lily. Finally arrived at this hellish vampire lair. The familiarity of the place reminded Paul of that terrible experience. But during the search, he met Maggie, a teammate of the demon hunters. That Maggie is also one of the people sent by the church to kill Paul. But she doesn't want to be with other people at all. She's here to help Paul. While they were catching up, a gunshot suddenly sounded from inside the cave. The two men ran over to the sound and found that Cam had met a vampire. It is the guardian of the vampire lair, more powerful than ordinary vampires. But facing two demon-hunting clerics at the same time, just see away hands together, straight towards the vampire rushed. Maggie, on the other hand, was in charge of support, throwing 2 stones to Paul as stepping stones. Under the perfect coordination of the two, the vampire was instantly eliminated. But this place has obviously been abandoned for many years. Why would there be vampires guarding the nest? When they arrived at the deepest part of the lair, they found that the vampires had built a new lair. Then the 3 of them came out of the lair and saw the town not far away in flames, which was obviously attacked by the vampires. At this point, the town has become a slaughterhouse for vampires. The horrific scene of abuse is like a human inferno. The man is the vampire's boss, Carl. At the same time, 3 other demon-hunting clerics also came to the town. But Carl did not panic at all, and even made a provocative gesture. The bald man in the middle couldn't stand it any longer. He just waved his weapon and charged at Carl. As a result, just a meeting, looks very powerful bald head was directly killed. The other 2 saw the scene, instantly lost the desire to fight. By the time the 3 Paul came to the town the next day, only to see the bodies of 3 demon hunters. But at this point, Cam couldn't understand how these vampires could slaughter a town in one night, take out 3 powerful demon hunters, and still be able to leave before dawn. After all, there was no lair around here, and it was only when several people came to the train station to investigate that they understood the reason for it. And the end of the tracks was the holy city. Therefore, they concluded that the ultimate goal of the vampires was not simply to slaughter, but to attack the holy city. The purpose of taking Lily was just to lure up the demon-hunting clerics. In order to stop the vampires, they planned to blow up the train before it reached the holy city. Without delay, the 3 of them set off along the tracks. They soon catch up with the train. Maggie is in charge of setting up the bomb in front of them. However, Paul had just climbed to the roof of the train when he met the vampire boss. Paul saw him but showed a look of horror. It turns out that the vampire boss is the same teammate who was once dragged into the lair. He was saved by the vampire queen, who also transformed him into a new kind of vampire. Carl suggests that Paul also join the vampire camp and take the holy city with him. Although Paul was sentenced to the church, but will not betray humans, it seemed that a great battle was inevitable. The 2 men rushed towards each other. Carl was already a powerful fighter, and when he became a vampire, Paul was no match for him. After a few rounds, he was knocked off the train with a punch. But he did not fall, but grabbed the bottom of the train. Maggie, who was installing the bomb in front of her, saw several vampires coming. She could only put down the work at hand to solve the immediate problem first. Maggie put her hands together and took out her own exorcism weapon. So several vampires were easily killed. But unfortunately, the detonator of the bomb was damaged. Maggie looked at the side of the chariot and instantly had a bold idea, directly tied the bomb to the chariot, ready to interact with the train. At the same time, the carriages searching for Cam also finally saw the figure of Lily, but he was just about to go after it was blocked outside the door. Just as he was about to raise his gun to break down the door, there was a sudden sound from the bottom of the carriage, and it was Paul. But at the same time, the vampires also broke through the door. Cam knocked down a vampire, broke through the roof of the train, to stop the vampires. The 2 men rushed to follow the direction of Lily to find. Carl arrives at the carriage. Paul was punched out and Cam was kicked off the train. But Carl took Lily to the roof of the train. He was about to reach his destination, and he planned to turn Lily into a vampire too. At the critical moment, Paul climbed out of the carriage and threw the cross and stabbed Carl. As Lily was about to fall off the train, he quickly stepped forward and grabbed her by the arm. At this moment, Carl was even more angry. He pulled out the cross around his neck, and was determined to let the 2 die together. But at that moment Paul and Carl looked ahead at the same time. It was Maggie riding a bomb chariot, with a speed of 200 kilometers per hour to come. The violent explosion instantly wiped out Carl and all the vampires in the carriage. Paul and his group were all lucky to survive. At the end of the movie, Paul returns to the holy city alone, throws the vampire's head in front of the people and tells them about the existence of the queen. In the face of the hard evidence, the church hierarchy still did not want to believe. Paul then leaves the holy city again to join Maggie and prepare to unite with the people outside the city to fight the vampires.